There have been many depictions of dryads in history, from beautiful goddesses of the forest to tricksy little shits. In D&D 5e, they toe the line straight down the neutral middle, but after looking at their abilities, I think it's time we craft ourselves an absolute gong show. And so the goal of today's encounter is to take a creature's mechanics, create new ones that still align with their core identity, and use both to add some lighthearted and fun gameplay. Hello, my name is Matt, and welcome to My Hidden Nerdy Side, and today we're tackling the forest phase known as Dryads. We are going to take a look at their lore, info, and abilities, and then build an encounter you can steal, modify, and plop straight into your D&D games. And to make sure this video is a decent length, we'll only be pulling the Dryad lore, info, and abilities that exist within the monster manual, all of which can be found on page 121. So without further ado, let's take a look at Dryads. So as I mentioned, Dryads are fae who tend to hang around in forests acting as their guardians and taking good care of them. They tend to work alongside other creatures like treants, satyrs, and other sylvan creatures to defend the forest from those who would harm it, but they will get their own hands dirty when necessary. Dryads tend to be more shy and reclusive, but aren't complete hermits and will even converse with other creatures who strike their interest, particularly the more attractive ones. It is said dryads are created by more powerful fae when these fae bind lesser spirits to trees as punishment for falling in love with a mortal, which is forbidden by many fae creatures. And due to this binding process, dryads have unique interactions with trees, which we'll get into in just a bit as we jump over to their actions and abilities. Dryads have magic resistance, the ability to charm creatures, and can also speak with beasts and plants. Not only does this fit thematically, but it can also make them difficult to deal with at lower levels. However, their two standout abilities are their innate spellcasting and tree stride. They can cast some pretty good spells like Entangle, Shillelagh, and Pass Without Trace, which bleeds into their tree stride ability beautifully. Basically, dryads can spend 10 feet of movement to slip in and out of trees, teleporting between them within a max range of 60 feet. This ability is going to be the foundation of the plentiful shenanigans we're going to subject to your party, and combining that with the spells I just mentioned, and you get some sneaky, troublesome, and hard-hitting tricksters to deal with. I'm also going to give them short bows for just a bit of extra fun and flexibility. If you want this to align more with a druidic-esque philosophy, simply have the arrowheads made from stone or a very sharp and hard wood. Okay, so now that we've gone over the basic Dryad lore, info, and abilities, let's start crafting an encounter. This encounter/quest will be aimed at parties level 4 to 8 depending on how difficult you want to make it, and last 1 to 2 sessions depending on how much you want to stretch it out. But you can easily run this encounter at higher levels by increasing the damage of certain elements we'll discuss in a bit. The party's motivation should always be tailored to the campaign, but for simplicity's sake, we'll just say your players are trying to retrieve an item they need to complete a quest. However, they don't realize this item plays an integral part of the forest ecosystem it lies within, and so, of course, conflict arises. So this is going to be your standard fetch quest where your players need an item, artifact, or whatever else and need to go get it, and the conflict arises because a creature or usually multiple creatures will try and stop them. Now what we decide this item is going to be will drastically change the tone of the encounter. If we say it's just some water from an eternal pool that only certain followers of a particular fae creature are allowed to drink from, that's less severe and your players typically won't have a problem saying, yeah, screw that, we need it so you can suck it. However, let's say they need a magical wooden staff that protects the wondrous forest from a ravaging disease that will kill it. Well, now your players have a serious moral quandary they need to think about. Both avenues and anything in between are valid, but for this encounter, we're keeping it light, so we'll go with the former for argument's sake. So your players go to some ancient forest in your world and need to go deep within it to retrieve what they need. When they do so, we'll say 4 to 8 Dryads will try to stop them using the abilities we talked about earlier, using Pass Without Trace to make them stealthier, Tree Stride to zip around, Shillelagh to make their attacks hurt more, Entangle to create difficult terrain shenanigans, and Short Bows for distance pot shots. And once they hit your players, they will do their best to avoid them at all costs and hop back in the trees. Honestly, with this formula alone, you could have a fun time messing with your players as they use their brains to figure out how to deal with this consistent, annoying barrage of nature ladies popping in and out of the wilderness. But let's dig deeper and plan out a few homebrew ways these Dryads can defend their territory. Use as many as you like, and even use them in tandem to make extra spicy situations. Let's keep it simple at first and use their charming ability to their advantage. Now, it's specifically worded the Dryad can charm a creature it can see, and if the target can see it. There's nothing in this ability that says sound is a requirement. So as soon as an overreaching player turns a corner and locks eyes with a Dryad, you can drop a charm and have the Dryad whisper to the player their fellow party members are trying to hurt her, or tell them to drop their weapons in a lake nearby, or to walk over to where there's a trap the player doesn't know about, or something else entirely before she slips back into a tree unnoticed, potentially causing some player-on-player chaos. Another way is to give the Dryads some form of illusionary magic to toy with your players. You could use it to create entire false pathways to other parts of the forest, causing your players to go in circles unless they catch on. You could also create false images of traps your players should avoid, while simultaneously covering up other areas where traps are actually waiting to be sprung. Hell, you could even create other illusions of Dryads or other monsters to confuse your players on what to attack during combat. Something else that could be really fun is giving them the ability to manipulate vines, tree branches, roots, and other parts of the ecosystem, which isn't too out of character given their tree stride abilities and the lore behind it. You could do some basic traps, like creating vine tripwires that snap and cause logs to swing by, but what's even more fun, in my opinion, is to give them the ability to animate vines and branches from a distance to halt or even displace your players. For example, you could give them a homebrew ability that causes roots to spring from the ground and wrap around your player's ankles, grappling on hit. For even more craziness, you could use a modified thorn whip that causes vines to shoot up and move players 10 feet in any direction. And to be extra devious, you could toss your players into areas that trigger traps, such as the vine tripwires we mentioned earlier. The last mechanical tomfoolery we're going to implement is altering their tree stride so they can take creatures with them. Well, at least a part of them. You see, if a creature is standing within 5 feet of a tree a Dryad is able to use Tree Stride on, a creature must make a dexterity saving throw, or when the Dryad pops into it, they can meld a part of the target's body into the tree, restraining it and causing them to use an action to try and free themselves. I mean, come on, how ridiculous and fun will it be when your fighter is chasing a Dryad near a tree and then has his arm sucked into and fused within it? And finally, with all these insane mechanics in place, what I think will take this encounter to the next level is adding a psychological component. You see, with all this crap happening to your players and the Dryads being ever elusive, your players are going to have to deal with a lot. And a way to add even more to their plate while actually helping them relieve some tension is to have the Dryads taunt your party with funny quips and insults. Nothing too mean or personal because this is supposed to be an enjoyable game, but just little jabs every now and then to keep it light. Here are a few I thought of, but feel free to modify them or use any other ones as you see fit. And every once in a while, toss a jab or two in there to get your players riled up and even more motivated to complete their task, because nothing motivates a player quite as much as pure spite. Just remember, all this Dryad trickery you'll introduce is to to discourage people from going deeper in the forest, since the Dryads don't want anyone retrieving whatever you decide they have. They will kill if necessary, but creating deterrence and trying to scare people away is their main method. But after many centuries of doing so, they have definitely developed a dark sense of humor regarding it, hence all the shenanigans. Now this encounter is really more about the journey, not the destination, and your players could be quite hurt by the time they reach the artifact or fountain or whatever they're after. So if they actually kill the Dryads messing with them earlier, it's good enough to let them take their prize and head out. But if you are that kind of dungeon master who wants that epic final mini boss fight, you could have the Dryads that were messing with the players earlier just be the first wave, and have a second wave of Dryads waiting to ambush anyone who made it to the end. And so now your players have to fight off the remaining Dryads, the Dryads they didn't kill earlier coming back to help, and a collection of all the crazy illusions, tripwires, tree melding, thorn whips, and everything else they had to deal with earlier, now layered on top of one another in a single convenient chaotic area. If your players are healthy and you do want to run this final encounter, I recommend anywhere from 5 to 10 Dryads based on your party's size and skill, as well as a couple of beasts such as wolves or bears if you feel so inclined. And remember, if you do want to add things like archdruids, treants, or even more Dryads, this encounter difficulty goes up quite a bit, so make sure your players are able to handle it. But with all the homebrew mechanics and playground ribbing going on in this encounter, your players will certainly have a terrific time. So, a forest encounter filled with tons of fun traps, homebrew mechanics, and creatures your players will love to take down? I think this is all quite spicy enough, but if we wanted to, how can we make it even spicier? Well, we touched on it earlier, but what if there was a powerful druid in the forest along with glowing spherical face spirits dancing in the air, and then, as a lair action during the final combat, he can bind these face spirits to the trees and create his own Dryads, giving your players an additional combat objective: kill the druid so he can't spawn any more enemies. To increase the overall difficulty by about 5 levels, you could toss some treants and shambling mounds the Dryads could command or even ride in on during your final combat. And finally, what if there was another group in the forest also looking for whatever your party is looking for? If it's something everyone can take a piece of, like magical fountain water, then your party has some allies. But if it's something there's only one of, now your party has additional threats to worry about, or some poor saps your party can convince to help them. Well, at least until they serve their purpose. But of course, this is just one of many ways you can use Dryads in your Dungeons & Dragons campaign. There are tons of different ways to take this encounter and spice it up, so please let me know what you would do in the comment section below so I can nerd out over it and smack myself on the head for not thinking of it. Also, let me know if there are any creatures that you would like me to build an encounter for in my future videos. I put out videos weekly, so feel free to subscribe and share this video around if you liked it, and stay tuned for upcoming content. Thanks for watching and indulging my hidden nerdy side.